Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the early mistakes that I made in Mythic Plus dungeons and the biggest lessons that I've learned. I've gone from complete noob to one of the highest rated dungeon healers in the span of one expansion. My original goal with this channel was to get more people to try and play Mythic Plus seriously, and I hope you all find this sort of thing useful. Although World of Warcraft has been around a while, Mythic Plus is somewhat new and a very unique game format. A lot of things that go on are unintuitive and take some getting used to. A big part of WoW is the learning curve, and maybe if I share some of the things that I wish I knew, you all can cut through the hard part faster and get to the stuff that's really fun. Let's get started. So the first lesson that I want to share is don't release. This is something that is a pretty unintuitive system. In any other game that you play, you die. You're not too happy that you die, and you maybe get a little notification or press A or press start or press enter to resurrect your character, and almost always you want to be doing it as fast as possible. WoW differs in a way, especially in Mythic Plus, where releasing doesn't always get you back where you want to go, and it'll put you at the nearest graveyard. In Mythic Plus, this can be a really bad thing because sometimes you may be very, very far away from the nearest graveyard. Especially if you have teammates that can resurrect you either in combat or out of combat, it's generally not a good idea to press release and respawn right away. Even if the whole party is dead, you maybe have skipped mobs, or you maybe have a teammate that can run faster than you or go invisible, and that way they can still resurrect you. One habit that I see from newer players is just immediately releasing every time they die. I think as a newer player, it's a good idea to just ask. If you don't know the dungeon, just say, hey, should I release here? And that way you can get an idea of what your teammate's doing, and someone might fill you in with where the nearest graveyard is. Lesson number 2 is you can't always play for score. So the currency or score or MMR or rating or whatever in Mythic Plus dungeons right now is from the site Raider.io. There's no in-game rating, however, most people have taken to the Raider.io scoring system to judge their progress and compare with other people. Once you get started in Mythic Plus dungeons, it's pretty easy to gain score. You just do a dungeon that you've never done before, and with 8 dungeons in Shadowlands, you'll be able to choose, well, okay, let me do this one, okay, I haven't done this one in a while, and then slowly upgrade your score. Eventually, however, you get to a point where you can't simply just go into Group Finder and get accepted immediately into a group for score. Especially as meta classes or really popular classes, it can be easy to get into groups, but you do hit a wall at some point, and you have to break that mindset of, I will only play a dungeon if it's an upgrade for me. If you look at the highest push groups, everyone tries to push keys up. That's not really a thing as you get higher rated in terms of, oh, well, I'll only accept an invite to a group if it's score for me, or I'm only going to join this group if it's score for me. Generally, the best thing you can gain is friends, and practice is going to be more valuable than score. You'll also find that once you break this habit, there are still lots of other people that have this habit, people that only will play with you if the key that you're inviting them to is score or very close to score, and generally the advice I would give is try and avoid those people. Lesson number 3, you always make way more mistakes than you think you do. This is one that I kind of knew, but I think really needs to be in a sort of list like this. And the advice that I always give people is to record yourself. Talking about self-improvement in World of Warcraft, it's so important to record yourself so you can see what's going on. The problem is, or the good part is in Mythic Plus Dungeon, is there's so many things going on, you don't really know what has your attention. You don't know what you can see on your screen, what you can see on your UI, and in hindsight, if you're looking back at a death, you might think something is unavoidable or something was easy to avoid. But then when you actually look back and see what was going on in your mind, you can realize, oh, maybe I should have changed my UI, or there's no way I could have seen this coming. And on top of that, you find way more mistakes than you think you do. Sometimes I'll hear stories. I had a guy come into my chat. He's like, okay, well, I was in a Taldazar and the tank died to the Razan bleed, and he said it was my fault, and I said it was his fault, and whose fault was it? And it's like, well, first of all, fault doesn't really matter. It's more about improving as a player, and the thing is both of you probably made a bunch of mistakes, and the only way that you're going to find those mistakes is to record yourself and watch back and see, oh, well, I didn't have my efflorescence on the ground, or I had an external, or he had a spell that he could have used, or whatever, he didn't use that health potion. There's plenty of opportunities where usually if there's something that went wrong, it's the fault of multiple parties, and the point of recording yourself is to go back and find out what you could have done differently. Lesson number 4, the in-between time is really important. All the time that you spend waiting for a patrol, or drinking, or getting back up to full health, or deciding what to do, all that stuff matters. You're on the clock after all, and one of the biggest differences that I'll see between lower level groups and higher level groups is that the lower level groups often aren't decisive enough, and that can be really hard for newer players. You can't be expected to know everything there is in a dungeon. There's just so much information and there's so many dungeons, but it's important to realize that that stuff does matter, and you should do your best if you want to move up the ranks to learn as much as you can and be as decisive as you can. This is mostly on tanks, but it does matter for everybody in that you generally should just be always going forward and trying to pull stuff and have a good idea what you need to get in the dungeon, what packs are avoidable and what packs aren't. Spend time in the dungeon journal or mythic dungeon tools if you can. It's really boring, but it'll help you a lot. There's kind of a sweet spot with speed in a dungeon. You don't want to go unnecessarily fast and kind of like drag the healer along so they can't get mana, or like pull stuff when you don't have cooldowns ready or when stuff isn't grouped together. But generally you should be going as fast as possible whenever you can. Lesson number 5, damage matters a lot. When I first started off, I would go through dungeons and there would be maybe one critical error that would cause a wipe, and then inevitably we wouldn't time the key, and I would think, well, if we didn't have that error, we'd be fine. But the thing is errors are going to happen. When you have a group of 5 players running in a 30 or 40 minute dungeon, there's going to be tons and tons of mistakes. Even the best groups wipe occasionally and bad things happen. You might have a bad overlap or whatever, and anything can happen that can cause mistakes. And damage is your allowance of mistakes. Initially, I thought that damage didn't matter a whole lot, and as long as you just did things correctly, you could time keys with any players or any class or whatever. But the thing is damage gives you way more of a leeway for mistakes. I don't want to say you should be only picking the highest damage classes, but in terms of deciding who you're inviting to your group, which friends you play with, or maybe what build you decide personally, it's actually really important to have a group that does a lot of damage. If you have a group that does 10 or 15 or even 20% more damage than the average group at your level, you can make 20% more mistakes. You can actually just full wipe every key and still time it versus other groups that couldn't. This is something that can be a bit hard to visualize at first, but the important takeaway here is that every point of damage matters. Even from tanks or healers or, picking one DPS or the other. I often get this question in the comments of YouTube videos that I make where I talk about the damage of tanks or healers, and people are like, well, why does that stuff even matter? And it's like, well, if everything is perfect, obviously it doesn't matter, but if your group overall is doing that extra 10 or 15% more damage, it's going to allow you so much more room for mistakes than if you have a low damage tank and a healer that does low or no damage versus a very high damage healer and tank. It's going to be like actually noticeable, and you're going to be able to play a lot worse and still get through the dungeon in a good speed. Lesson number 6, be willing to experiment and be willing to fail. This is probably one of the last lessons of the list that I learned personally. It's something that my current tank really broke me of, and it's that you can't really take every key serious and just try and time every single key. You have to do stuff to learn. Like if you never experiment and try different builds or try different pulls or overall just put yourself out of your comfort zone, it's a lot harder to improve as a player. Most people are good at a situation where everything goes right and there's no challenging parts to the run, and there's nothing to think about and you're just sort of on autopilot. And it's important to be able to do that too. But the more you put yourself in these uncomfortable situations where you're pulling like different mobs that you didn't even know that you could pull together, or just, chaining together packs that you didn't think you could before, or maybe running a build as a healer that's very, very offensive, or not bringing a talent that's normally kind of like your safety cushion that you always use. When you do those sorts of things, you really help yourself grow as a player and learn. I think this is applicable to like basically everything in life too, not just World of Warcraft, but in general you should look to do things that put yourself out of your comfort zone. And obviously there's a time and a place for this, right? If your group or your friends are a little bit frustrated, or if you have a key that you really need, or if things aren't going well, yeah, sometimes you just have to buckle down and put the safety belt on and take one step at a time. But as a general habit, the way that you go about things and the way that you play dungeons, you really should play to learn. It kind of goes hand in hand with you can't always play for score too when you're a noob. It's like, well, if you have two options, to just wait and hope that you can get into a better key, or to go into maybe a slightly lower key and try and make some friends, or try a new talent build and, just experiment, I think usually getting in there and battling is going to be the better option. And lastly, be happy when you're on the bench. This is something that my whole channel was sort of started on, and it's a motto that I really like. The thing is nowadays in games, you're not used to having a bench. You go in, you load up Dota 2 or League or whatever game that you play, and there's one big shiny button, and you press it, and you get a timer, and then bam, you're in a game. There's no social networking, there's no waiting. All it is just bam, attack. And while there's some benefits to that system too, the problem is you end up with people that you don't always want to play with, and you end up with, kind of stuck in a rut where you're just like at 50% win rate and you're not really accomplishing anything. WoW is kind of unique in that there's no matchmaking for Mythic Plus. You just go down the groups just like it's the year 2000 again, and just look at everyone's name and try and apply to groups and see who accepts you. And it's cool and it's bad at the same time. It can be frustrating when you don't get to play, but ultimately it's a part of the game. It's something that you have to accept, especially as you move higher, that you can't always just have like this static group of people that you play with all the time, and like every time you log in you're playing. Like sometimes you just have to be on the bench. And it happened to me a lot as I was moving up. Obviously you want to get in there and, do some lower keys to meet people or whatever, but sometimes you just can't find groups, whether it's, mid-level keys or higher level keys or stuff that's score for you. You just sort of have to wait around, and it's something that's okay. You have to embrace that feeling, because it makes the times that you do high keys even more special. If you can always just press a button and then get match made into, whatever the highest key is that's score for you, I think Mythic Plus would lose a lot of the magic that it has in terms of things being exciting or feeling like there's something on the line. So even though sometimes you go a whole push week or a weekend or even a day, you have a Friday night, and for WoW players, a Friday night is sitting around and playing on the computer, and you're expecting to get a lot done and have all your friends play, and maybe, you log on and they're playing with another healer and that guy doesn't log off for the whole day, or maybe, you have a friend missing and you don't have anything to do. Ultimately, you just have to accept that sometimes it's going to happen, and you can't get down on yourself when you're on the bench. You just sort of have to accept it, and you're like, hey, today we're on the bench, and move on. It was a little bit rambly, but I hope I got across some of the lessons that people don't necessarily tell you when you're just getting into Mythic Plus. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be coming out with tons more Mythic Plus content, like guides or commentary videos like this, and also just Mythic raid stuff and everything. Happy keying.